mongering and for standing up in unity for the
Representative Omar, before this committee votes on your recommendations for increased aid to Somalia, I think the members should know about the $340,000 you've personally wired to Mogadishu over the past 4 years, and specifically who received that money. Vice President J.D. Vance's voice cut through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing room like a blade. Every head turned, the cameras, Caspian news networks, all of them swiveled from Ilhan Omar at the witness table to the door where Vance had just entered. This wasn't normal. Vice presidents didn't attend committee hearings, especially not hearings where they weren't invited. But there he stood, walking down the center aisle with FBI Director Christopher Wray and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessant, flanking him like prosecutors approaching a defendant. Omar froze mid-sentence. She'd been 30 minutes into her testimony about the humanitarian crisis in Somalia, about the need for more American aid, about the moral obligation to help refugees. The Democratic members of the committee had been nodding sympathetically. The Republicans had looked bored, but not hostile. It was going exactly as planned until the Vice President of the United States walked in carrying a folder with classified markings. Committee Chairman Jim Riss looked as confused as everyone else. "Mr. Vice President, this is highly irregular. We're in the middle of testimony from—" "I am aware, Senator." Vance walked straight to the witness table where Omar sat, set the folder down in front of her. "But Representative Omar is testifying about U.S. policy towards Somalia, about how much aid we should send, about which organizations should receive American taxpayer money. I think before the committee makes any decisions based on her expert testimony, they should know about her personal financial connections to designated terrorist organizations in Somalia." The room erupted, reporters leaning forward, committee members talking over each other. Omar's face had gone from confident to pale in seconds. Vance opened the folder, pulled out what looked like bank records, wire transfer documents, all with Omar's name clearly visible. 47 separate wire transfers, Vance said, his voice carrying over the chaos, between January 2020 and October 2024, totaling $340,000, all sent through money transfer services to one recipient in Mogadishu, Ahmed Noor Say, your brother-in-law. He placed the documents on the table where the cameras could see them, Omar's signature, her bank account numbers, the amounts, the dates. Ahmed Noor Say operates a business called Baccarat Trading Company. Treasury Department designated it as a terrorism financing entity in 2023. Ahmed himself is on the FBI terrorism watch list, and the money you sent him, the $340,000, we've traced it through Hala networks to Al-Shabaab operatives to the very terrorists you claim you fled from as a child. Omar tried to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at the documents like they were poisonous. Those were her bank records, her transactions, her money going to her brother-in-law, who she'd never mentioned in any financial disclosure. Chairman Riss found his voice. "Mr. Vice President, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence?" "I have 18 months of FBI investigation." Ray stepped forward, opening his own folder. Wire transfer records, NSA intercepts of Ahmed Noor Sahed coordinating with Al-Shabaab commanders, Treasury Department money tracing showing Representative Omar's funds being used to finance terrorist operations. This isn't allegation. This is documented fact. The ranking Democrat Senator Ben Cardin looked stricken. "Representative Omar, do you want to respond to these accusations?" Omar's mouth opened and closed. Her hands gripped the witness table. She'd come here to advocate for Somalia, to position herself as the voice of refugees and immigrants, to attack American foreign policy from the moral high ground. Now she was sitting at a witness table with evidence of terrorism financing spread in front of her, C-SPAN broadcasting live, and no idea what to say. Those wire transfers were to family. I was helping family members with financing al-Shabaab operations, Vance interrupted. Director Rai showed the committee where the money went. Ray pulled up a chart showing the money flow. Omar's bank account to money transfer service to Ahmed Nur Sahed, Ahmed to a network of individuals. Those individuals flagged as al-Shabaab financiers and operatives. We've traced $34,000 directly to individuals involved in terrorist attacks, Ray said matter-of-factly. The Mogadishu hotel bombing in 2022, the attack on African Union peacekeepers in 2023. Both operations used money that originated from Representative Omar's wire transfers. Omar stood up abruptly. This is Islamophobia. This is targeting me because I'm Muslim, and I speak out against. This is evidence, Vance said calmly. Bank records don't have religious bias. Wire transfers aren't Islamophobic. You sent $340,000 to a designated terrorism financier. That's a federal crime. And you did it while serving in Congress, while having access to classified briefings about al-Shabaab, while voting on foreign policy that affected Somalia. He pulled out voting records. You voted against designating al-Shabaab as a foreign terrorist organization in 2021. You opposed sanctions on Somali entities in 2022. You pushed for increased aid to Somalia that would flow through organizations your family controls. Every vote you cast on Somalia benefited your family's interests. You weren't representing Minnesota. You were representing Mogadishu. The Democratic committee members looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. The Republicans looked energized, like Christmas had come early. The cameras captured every second of Omar's face, cycling through emotions: defiance, panic, anger, fear. I want my attorney, Omar said, her voice shaking. You'll need one, Vance agreed, because the FBI has more than just terrorism financing to discuss with you. Director Rai tell the committee about the marriage fraud. And just like that, Ilhan Omar realized this wasn't just about money. This was about everything. Every lie, every fraud, every betrayal, all of it about to be exposed on live television. 4 hours earlier, Ilhan Omar had been in her congressional office in the Longworth House office building, reviewing her testimony with her staff. She felt good, confident. This was her moment. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee had invited her to testify as an expert witness on U.S. policy toward Somalia and East Africa. Her expertise being Somali American, being a former refugee, being the most prominent voice in Congress on East African issues. This is perfect, her chief of staff said, reviewing the testimony. You position yourself as the moral voice on refugee issues. You attack the administration's Africa policy as insufficient. You call for more aid, more engagement, more support for Somalia. Omar nodded, reading through her prepared remarks. They were good, emotional, personal. She'd talk about fleeing Somalia as a child, about the refugee camp in Kenya, about arriving in America with nothing, about the American dream that allowed a refugee to become a congresswoman. Then she'd pivot to policy, to how America wasn't doing enough, to how the humanitarian crisis in Somalia required more U.S. aid, to how cutting aid was cruel and short-sighted. It would play perfectly with her base, would get her on every progressive news show, would reinforce her brand as the bold voice standing up for refugees and immigrants. The Republicans will probably attack you, her communications director noted. They always do, but you're good at that. Turn it into them being anti-immigrant. Let them attack, Omar said with confidence. I'm testifying about saving lives. If they want to attack that, they can explain to voters why they hate refugees. What Omar didn't know was that at that exact moment in a secure facility in Virginia, Vice President J.D. Vance was reviewing the final version of an 18-month FBI investigation that would destroy her. The investigation had started in June 2023 when Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network flagged unusual wire transfer patterns from Omar's personal bank account. 47 transfers to Somalia over 4 years, all structured just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. Classic money laundering pattern. Treasury had referred it to the FBI. The FBI had opened a counterterrorism investigation, and what they found was worse than anyone expected. Vance sat in the SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, with his investigation team, FBI Director Wray, Treasury Secretary Besant, NSA Director, White House counsel, all with top-secret clearances, all with evidence that would end a congressional career. Walk me through it one more time, Vance said. I want to make sure we have her dead to rights before I walk into that hearing. Wray opened the primary evidence binder. Representative Ilhan Omar, 42 years old, Congresswoman from Minnesota's 5th District since 2019. Born in Mogadishu, Somalia in 1982. Came to United States as refugee in 1992. Became citizen in 2000. Elected to Minnesota State Legislature in 2016, Congress in 2018. Her public story is the American dream. Refugee becomes Congresswoman. But we've found systematic criminal activity spanning her entire time in office. He pulled out the financial records, starting with the money. Between January 2020 and October 2024, Omar made 47 wire transfers from her personal Bank of America account to money transfer services. Total amount $340,000. All transfers were structured under $10,000 to avoid currency transaction reports. All the money went to one recipient, Ahmed Noor Say. He's her brother-in-law, her first husband's brother. Ahmed is based in Mogadishu, where he operates Bakara Trading Company, ostensibly an import-export business. Vance looked at surveillance photos. Ahmed Noor Say in Mogadishu meeting with known Al-Shabaab operatives. How do we know he's a terrorist financier? Multiple sources, Wray said. Treasury designated Bakara Trading as a terrorism financing entity in 2023 based on evidence it was being used to move money to Al-Shabaab. Ahmed himself is on FBI terrorism watch list. NSA has intercepts of him coordinating with known Al-Shabaab commanders. He showed the intercepts, translated conversations between Ahmed and individuals identified as Al-Shabaab financial facilitators discussing fund transfers and operational needs. We traced Omar's money through the Hala network. Treasury Secretary Besant added, Hala is an informal money transfer system common in Somalia. Very difficult to trace, but we had help from Somali government sources who want Al-Shabaab stopped. She showed the money flow. Omar sends money to transfer service. Transfer service delivers to Ahmed. Ahmed distributes through Hala network to multiple individuals. We've identified 18 recipients who are confirmed Al-Shabaab members or facilitators. We can directly connect $34,000 from Omar's transfers to 2 specific terrorist attacks. The Mogadishu hotel bombing in March 2022 that killed 17 people, including 2 American aid workers, and the attack on African Union peacekeepers in August 2023 that killed 9. Vance absorbed this. She funded terrorist attacks while serving in Congress. Correct, Wray confirmed. But it gets worse. Her congressional voting record shows she consistently voted in ways that benefited al-Shabaab and her family's interests in Somalia. He pulled up voting records. July 2021, vote to designate al-Shabaab as a foreign terrorist organization. She voted no. One of only 3 House members to vote no. October 2022, vote to impose sanctions on entities financing terrorism in Somalia. She voted no. March 2023, foreign aid appropriations. Representative Omar introduced amendments to increase aid to Somalia by $200 million. The aid was supposed to go to humanitarian organizations, but she specifically pushed for organizations with ties to her family's business interests. She wasn't just funding terrorism with personal money. She was using her congressional position to advance policies that benefited terrorists and her family. NSA director added the intelligence dimension. We've been monitoring her communications under FISA warrant since April 2023. The warrant was approved based on probable cause she was acting as an agent of a foreign terrorist organization. Her phone calls to Ahmed show her discussing U.S. policy towards Somalia, discussing what legislation is coming, discussing how to influence aid distribution. She's coordinating with him, using her position to help him. Vance looked at the evidence. It was overwhelming. But he knew the moment he exposed this publicly, Omar would claim Islamophobia, would say she was being targeted for being Muslim, for being critical of Israel, for being a woman of color. What about the marriage fraud? He asked. That's been alleged for years, but never proven. White House counsel pulled out the DNA evidence. We finally got it. When Omar was arrested for a traffic violation in August, Minnesota took a DNA sample per standard procedure. We got a warrant to compare it to Ahmed Nur Said Elmay's DNA from when he applied for immigration status. The results show 99.9% probability they're siblings, brother and sister. Which means when Omar married Ahmed Elmay in 2009, she married her brother. That's immigration fraud. She did it to get him U.S. residency status. Vance read the DNA report. It was definitive. This destroys the no evidence defense she's used for years. And there's tax evasion, Treasury added. She received income from Somali sources that she never reported. Money flowing back from her family. Approximately $250,000 over 5 years that appears nowhere on her tax returns. She also used campaign funds for personal expenses. Her husband's consulting firm received $2.8 million from her campaign. We've investigated what services he provided. Can't find any actual work product. Vance sat back, took it all in. Terrorism financing, immigration fraud, tax evasion, campaign finance violations, using congressional position to benefit foreign interests. It was the most complete corruption case he'd seen against a sitting member of Congress. She's testifying at Foreign Relations Committee today, Vance said, about Somalia aid, recommending U.S. send more money to organizations connected to her family while she's actively funding terrorists there. He made his decision. I'm going to that hearing. I'm walking in with this evidence on live television, and I'm ending her career today. His team looked at each other. That's unprecedented, White House counsel said. Vice presidents don't ambush witnesses at committee hearings. I'm not ambushing a witness, Vance said. I'm exposing a terrorist financier who happens to hold a congressional seat. There's a difference. At 2 p.m., the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing began. Chairman Riss gave the opening. Today, we're examining U.S. policy towards Somalia and East Africa. We're honored to have Representative Ilhan Omar as our witness given her expertise and background. Omar took her seat at the witness table, adjusted her microphone, looked at the cameras with practiced confidence. This was her element, speaking truth to power, advocating for the powerless. Chairman Riss, Ranking Member Cardin, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me. I want to talk today about the humanitarian crisis in Somalia and what America can do to help. She launched into her testimony, emotional, personal, describing her experience as a child refugee, the trauma of fleeing violence, the hope of coming to America, the opportunity this country gave her. But America isn't doing enough for the people who are suffering now. The drought in Somalia has displaced millions. The conflict with Al-Shabaab continues to destabilize the region, and American aid has been cut when it should be increased. She called for more funding, more aid organizations, more engagement with Somali civil society. She made it sound noble, humanitarian, moral. The Democratic senators nodded along. Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut asked sympathetic questions about the humanitarian situation. Senator Chris Coons from Delaware asked about refugee resettlement. Omar was hitting her stride. This was going perfectly. In 30 minutes, she'd be done. Would do a press conference attacking Republicans for not caring about refugees. Would be on MSNBC by tonight, talking about her powerful testimony. Then the doors at the back of the hearing room opened. Vice President J.D. Vance walked in. Not announced, not invited, just walked in with FBI Director and Treasury Secretary heading straight down the aisle toward the witness table. The room went silent. Senators stopped mid-question. Staffers froze. Cameras swiveled to capture this completely unprecedented moment. Omar watched him approach, confusion on her face. Why was the vice president here? This wasn't his committee. He had no role in this hearing. Then she saw the classified folder in his hand, saw the expression on his face, and felt the first flutter of real fear. Vance reached the witness table and set his folder down in front of Omar with a solid thump that echoed in the now silent room. Chairman Riss tried to regain control. Mr. Vice President, this is highly unusual. We're in the middle of a committee hearing. I'm aware, Senator Riss. Vance's voice was respectful but firm. But Representative Omar is testifying about Somalia, about how much American aid should go there, about which organizations should receive taxpayer money. Before this committee votes on anything based on her recommendations, I believe the members should know about her personal financial connections to the very terrorist organizations we're supposed to be fighting. The room erupted. Reporters scrambling for phones, committee members talking over each other. Omar's face cycling from confusion to anger to something close to panic. Senator Cardin, the ranking Democrat, found his voice. Mr. Vice President, that's an extraordinary accusation. Do you have evidence to support? Vance opened the folder, pulled out bank records, set them on the table facing the cameras so everyone could see. 47 wire transfers, January 2020 through October 2024. Total amount $340,000, all from Representative Omar's personal bank account. All sent to Mogadishu, Somalia, all to one recipient. He placed each document deliberately. Wire transfer confirmations, bank statements, all with Omar's name clearly visible. Her signature, her account numbers, the amounts ranging from $3,000 to $9,000, always under the $10,000 reporting threshold. The recipient was Ahmed Noor Sai, Representative Omar's brother-in-law. Ahmed operates a business in Mogadishu called Baccarat Trading Company. Vance pulled out Treasury Department documents. In September 2023, The United States Treasury Department designated Baccara Trading as a terrorism financing entity. Ahmed Nourseh himself is on the FBI terrorism watch list, and the money Representative Omar sent to him. We've traced it through Hala networks to al-Shabaab operatives. Omar tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't work. Those were family transfers. I was helping family with financing terrorism, Vance said flatly. Director Rai showed the committee the money trail. FBI Director Ray stepped forward with his own evidence. Flowcharts showing the money movement. Omar's bank to Western Union, to Ahmed Nourseh, to a network of individuals in Mogadishu and surrounding areas. We've identified 18 recipients of funds that originated from Representative Omar's transfers. Ray did at his voice clinical and professional. All 18 are on terrorism watch lists. 7 are confirmed al-Shabaab members. 4 are financial facilitators for the organization. The remaining 7 provide logistical support. He pulled up photographs, men in Mogadishu, some in military-style clothing, some in traditional dress, all labeled with names and terrorism-related designations. We can directly trace $34,000 from Representative Omar's transfers to 2 specific terrorist attacks. The Mogadishu hotel bombing on March 15, 2022, that killed 17 people, including 2 American aid workers, and the attack on African Union peacekeepers on August 23, 2023, that killed 9 soldiers. The committee room was deathly silent. Every senator staring at the evidence, every camera capturing Omar's face as the color drained from it. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, spoke up. His voice was hard. Representative Omar, did you or did you not send $340,000 to a designated terrorism financier? Omar's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I sent money to family. I had no knowledge of what they were doing with— You're on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Vance interrupted. You receive classified briefings about al-Shabaab, about terrorism financing networks in Somalia. You knew or should have known exactly what your brother-in-law was doing, and you sent him money anyway. Senator Marco Rubio piled on. Mr. Vice President, you mentioned her voting record. Can you elaborate? Vance pulled out congressional voting records. Representative Omar has voted on Somalia-related issues multiple times. Her voting pattern is interesting. He read from the documents. July 2021, House vote on resolution to designate al-Shabaab as a foreign terrorist organization. The vote was 417 to 3. 3 members voted no. Representative Omar was one of them. She voted against designating the organization she was secretly funding as a terrorist group. Gasps from the audience. Some senators literally leaning back in shock. October 2022. Vote on imposing sanctions on entities that finance terrorism in East Africa. Representative Omar voted no. She was one of 7 members to vote no. March 2023. Foreign aid appropriations. Representative Omar introduced amendments to increase aid to Somalia by $200 million. The aid was supposed to go to humanitarian organizations, but she specifically pushed for organizations with ties to her family's business interests. Senator Ted Cruz was practically vibrating with anger. So, she was funding terrorists with personal money and trying to get taxpayer money sent to organizations her family controls. That appears to be the case, Vance confirmed. Omar finally found her voice. It came out too loud, too defensive. This is Islamophobia. This is the same targeting that Muslims in this country have faced for decades. You're attacking me because I speak out against American imperialism, because I criticize Israel, Because I'm a Muslim woman who won't. This is evidence. Vance's voice cut through her rising volume. Bank records aren't Islamophobic. Wire transfers don't have religious bias. You sent $340,000 to a designated terrorism financier. That's material support for terrorism under federal law. Title 18, Section 2339B of the U.S. Code. It carries a penalty of up to 20 years in prison. He pulled out the statute, showed it to the committee. The law is clear. Providing material support, including money, to foreign terrorist organizations is a federal crime. It doesn't matter if you claim it was for family. It doesn't matter if you claim you didn't know the money went to terrorists. You're guilty. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, looked pained, but asked the obvious question. Representative Omar, can you explain these wire transfers? Omar looked at Murphy like he'd betrayed her. He was a Democrat. He was supposed to be on her side, but he was looking at the evidence spread on the table and couldn't ignore it. I sent money to family members who were struggling, Omar said, her voice shaking. Now, Somalia is a poor country. My family needed help. I had no idea what Ahmed was doing with— You had extensive idea, Ray interrupted. We have NSA intercepts of your phone calls with Ahmed, conversations where you discussed U.S. policy towards Somalia, where you told him about upcoming legislation, where you coordinated with him about which organizations should receive aid. He pulled out transcripts redacted to protect sources and methods, but with enough detail visible to be damning. Phone call from May 2022. You told Ahmed that the House Foreign Affairs Committee was considering sanctions on Somali businesses. You discussed how to structure his company to avoid those sanctions. That's coordination with a foreign entity to evade U.S. law. Phone call from November 2023. You discussed with Ahmed how much aid money would be coming to Somalia and which organizations would receive it. You were sharing classified information from committee briefings with a terrorism financier. Omar was shaking her head. Those calls were about family business, about using your congressional position to help terrorists, Vance said. But we're not done. Secretary Besant, tell the committee about the tax evasion. Treasury Secretary Besant stepped forward with more documents. In addition to the money Representative Omar sent to Somalia, we've identified money flowing back to her from Somali sources. Approximately $250,000 over 5 years. This money appears nowhere on her tax returns. She showed the financial tracking. Money came through various channels, some through her husband's consulting company, some through shell companies, some in cash, but we've traced it all. And she reported none of it to the IRS. That's tax evasion. Title 26, Section 7221, penalty of up to 5 years in prison and $250,000 in fines. Senator Chuck Grassley jumped in. What about her campaign finances? There have been allegations for years about her paying her husband's company. Besant nodded. Her campaign paid her husband's consulting firm, E Street Group, $2.8 million between 2019 and 2024. We investigated what services this company provided. Interviewed campaign staff, asked for deliverables, work product, anything showing what they did for almost $3 million. Nobody could describe actual work. The company has no website, no other clients, no apparent expertise. It appears to be a shell company created solely to funnel campaign money to her household. That's conversion of campaign funds for personal use. That's federal election law violation. That's fraud. Vance pulled out what was clearly the most explosive evidence, a DNA report with official federal seals on it. And then there's the immigration fraud. The allegations have existed for years. Representative Omar has dismissed them as conspiracy theories, racist smears, baseless accusations. Let me show the committee why those accusations were accurate. He held up the DNA report. In August 2024, Representative Omar was stopped for a traffic violation in Minnesota. Standard procedure in Minnesota is to collect DNA samples during any arrest or citation. That sample was entered into the federal database. We obtained a warrant to compare her DNA to that of Ahmed Noor Said Elme. Ahmed Elme was the man Representative Omar married in 2009. She claimed he was unrelated to her, just a man she married, then divorced in 2017 before remarrying her first husband, Ahmed Hersi. Vance showed the DNA results. The comparison shows a 99.9% probability that Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Noor Said Elme are biological siblings. They share the same parents. They are brother and sister. The committee room exploded. Senators shouting, reporters on phones, cameras zooming in on Omar's face as she sat frozen, unable to deny scientific evidence. She married her brother, Vance said over the chaos. She did it to help him obtain U.S. residency status. That's immigration fraud under Title 8, Section 1325 of the U.S. Code. It's also marriage fraud under Title 8, Section 1182. Both are felonies. Senator Tom Cotton was on his feet. This is a sitting member of Congress who committed immigration fraud to get her brother into the country. Correct, Vance confirmed. And it gets worse. Ahmed Elme, her brother, has connections to extremist groups in Somalia. By helping him obtain U.S. residency, she potentially facilitated the entry of an individual with terrorist ties. Omar finally exploded. This is a lie. This is fabricated evidence. You're manufacturing. It's a DNA test, Vance said calmly. From a federal laboratory. Chain of custody documented, scientifically verified. You can challenge it in court, but the science doesn't lie. You married your brother. Senator Cardin tried to regain some order. Mr. Vice President, these are extraordinary allegations. Does Representative Omar have an opportunity to respond with counsel present? She can have all the counsel she wants, Vance said. But the evidence doesn't change. The wire transfers are documented. The money trail to terrorists is documented. The DNA test is scientific fact. The tax evasion is proven by her own returns. The campaign finance violations are on record with the FEC. He turned to face Omar directly. You came to America as a refugee. This country gave you safety, education, opportunity. You became a citizen. You got elected to Congress. You had every advantage. And you used your position to fund the terrorists you claimed to have fled from. You betrayed everyone who believed in you. Omar's eyes were wet now. Whether from anger or fear or shame, it was impossible to tell. I dedicated my life to helping refugees, to fighting for immigrant rights. You dedicated your life to enriching yourself and your family while using progressive politics as cover, Vance interrupted. You're not a champion of refugees. You're a fraud who exploited your refugee story for personal gain and political power. And while you were lecturing Americans about their moral failures, you were wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars to terrorists. Chairman Riss tried to restore order. I think, given the severity of these allegations, this committee needs to adjourn. And no, Senator Cotton cut him off. We're not adjourning. We have a witness under oath who's been accused of terrorism financing and immigration fraud. I want answers. Representative Omar, did you send $340,000 to Ahmed Noor Said? Silence. Omar, staring at the table. Did you marry your brother to help him get immigration status? More silence. Did you fail to report $250,000 in income on your tax returns? Still nothing. Senator Rubio stood. Mr. Chairman, the witness is refusing to answer direct questions about material support for terrorism. I move that this committee immediately refer this matter to the Department of Justice and vote to recommend the House expel Representative Omar. Second, Senator Cotton said immediately. The Democrats on the committee looked at each other. They knew what was coming. The evidence was overwhelming. If they defended Omar now, they'd be defending a terrorist financier. But if they voted against her, they'd face backlash from the progressive wing. Senator Murphy made the calculation. I think we need to see all the evidence before voting on anything, but this should absolutely be referred to DOJ. Agreed, Senator Coons said quietly. Other Democrats nodded. Omar looked around wildly, every Democrat abandoning her, every Republican already calling for her head. The evidence spread across the table where millions were watching on C-SPAN. I want my attorney, she said, her voice barely audible. You'll have plenty of time to talk to attorneys, Vance said. Director Ray, I believe you have something to tell Representative Omar. Ray pulled out a document, read from it formally. Ilhan Omar, based on evidence gathered during an 18-month investigation into material support for terrorism, immigration fraud, tax evasion, and related offenses, a federal grand jury has returned an indictment. There are FBI agents waiting outside this hearing room. When you leave, you will be taken into federal custody. Omar's face went white. You can't arrest a sitting member of Congress. We can arrest anyone who commits federal crimes, Ray said. The Constitution protects you from arrest while Congress is in session for minor offenses, not for felonies, not for terrorism. You're going to be arrested, Representative Omar. Today. The hearing room erupted again. This wasn't just political theater. This was an actual arrest of a sitting congresswoman happening in real time on live television. Chairman Riss gave repeatedly trying to restore order. This hearing is adjourned. Representative Omar, you're dismissed from... Omar was already standing, trying to leave, but her legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk. Her staff tried to help her, but she pushed them away. She walked toward the exit on unsteady legs, every camera following her. She reached the door, pushed it open, and found 6 FBI agents waiting in the hallway. The agents moved efficiently, professional. They'd done this 1,000 times, but never to a sitting member of Congress. Never on live television with cameras capturing every second. Ilhan Omar, you're under arrest for material support for terrorism, immigration fraud, tax evasion, and related charges. The lead agent read from the indictment as another agent moved behind Omar with handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Get your hands off me, Omar tried to pull away. This is illegal. You can't arrest me. I'm a member of Congress. You're a suspect in a terrorism financing case, the agent said calmly. Put your hands behind your back. The handcuffs went on. Click, click, the sound echoing in the marble hallway. Cameras capturing every moment. Omar, in handcuffs being arrested by federal agents, while other members of Congress watched from the doorway in shocked silence. This is political persecution, Omar shouted as the agents began walking her toward the elevator. This is the Trump administration targeting its critics. This 18 months of evidence showing you Funded Al-Shabaab, one of the agents said quietly. Not unkindly, just stating fact. Save it for your lawyer, ma'am. The elevator doors closed on Ilhan Omar in handcuffs. FBI agents on either side. Her career as a congresswoman over after just 6 years. The doors closed, and she was gone. Back in the hearing room, the committee sat in stunned silence. Then Senator Rubio spoke. Mr. Chairman, I move that this committee vote immediately on a resolution referring Representative Omar to the House Ethics Committee with recommendation for immediate expulsion. Second, said Senator Cotton. The vote was unanimous, 15-0. Every Democrat and every Republican voting to recommend Omar's expulsion. Within an hour, the footage was everywhere. Not edited clips, full video of the entire confrontation. Vance presenting evidence. Omar unable to answer questions. The DNA test proving she married her brother. The money trail to terrorists. The arrest. Congresswoman arrested for terrorism financing was the headline on every news site. Not Fox News spinning it, just the facts. A sitting member of Congress arrested by the FBI for funding Al-Shabaab. By evening, the House had scheduled an emergency expulsion vote for the next day. Speaker Mike Johnson issued a statement. The evidence presented today is overwhelming. If Representative Omar funded terrorism while serving in Congress, she cannot remain in this body. Even progressive Democrats were running away. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez issued a statement. If these allegations are true, they represent a complete betrayal of progressive values. We must let the legal process proceed. Bernie Sanders. Terrorism has no place in our political movement. These are serious charges that must be addressed through the justice system. The Squad, Omar's closest allies in Congress, were all distancing themselves. Nobody wanted to be associated with a terrorism financier. That night, Omar sat in federal detention at the Alexandria Detention Center. Not in general population, in protective custody for her own safety and because of the sensitive nature of the charges. Her lawyer, a high-profile criminal defense attorney she'd hired with emergency funds, sat across from her in the visitation room, going through the evidence. This is bad, Ilhan. This is really bad. Omar was still in shock. They can't prove I knew the money was going to terrorists. I was sending it to family. Your brother-in-law is on the terrorism watch list, the lawyer said flatly. You're on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You get classified briefings about Al-Shabaab. The prosecution will argue you knew or should have known, and frankly, the jury will believe them. What about the DNA test? Can we challenge that? The lawyer sighed. It's from a federal laboratory. Chain of custody is documented. The science is solid. You married your brother, Ilhan. That's provable fact. It was just to help him get status. Lots of people do that. Lots of people don't become congresswomen and then get caught. And lots of people don't marry brothers who have terrorist connections. This isn't a typical immigration fraud case. Omar put her head in her hands. What are my options? Honestly, take a plea. The evidence is overwhelming. If you go to trial on terrorism financing charges, you could get 25 years. But if you plead guilty, show remorse, cooperate with investigators about the Al-Shabaab network, you might get 10 years. 10 years in prison. You funded terrorist attacks that killed people, Ilhan, including 2 American aid workers. If the prosecution can prove even $1 you sent was used in those attacks, you're looking at life without parole. 10 years is a gift. The next morning, the House of Representatives held an emergency session. The vote on expulsion required 2/3 majority, 290 votes. The final tally was 376 to 54. Only 54 members, all progressive Democrats from safe seats, voted against expulsion. Every Republican voted yes. Most Democrats voted yes. Even Omar's former squad allies abstained rather than defend her. She was expelled, the third fastest expulsion in House history. Gone after 6 years. The criminal trial began in February 2025 in federal court in Washington, D.C. Omar pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her defense strategy claimed she was being politically persecuted, that the evidence was manufactured, that she was targeted for being Muslim. The prosecution presented the wire transfers, the money trail to Al-Shabaab, NSA intercepts of her phone calls with Ahmed, the DNA test proving she married her brother, her tax returns showing unreported income, her campaign finance violations. It took the jury 3 days to deliberate. When they came back, the verdict was devastating. Guilty on 17 counts of material support for terrorism. Guilty on 3 counts of immigration fraud. Guilty on 5 counts of tax evasion. Guilty on 4 counts of campaign finance violations. Guilty. 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 The judge, an Obama appointee who couldn't show any bias, was harsh at sentencing. Ms. Omar, you came to this country as a refugee. America gave you everything. Safety, education, opportunity. You became a citizen. You were elected to Congress. You had a platform to actually help people. And you used it to fund the very terrorists you claim to have fled from. The money you sent to Ahmed Noor Say was used to finance attacks that killed innocent people, including 2 American aid workers who were in Somalia trying to help refugees like you once were. Their blood is on your hands. You married your brother to commit immigration fraud. You evaded taxes. You stole campaign money. And you did all of it while lecturing Americans about their moral failings. I sentence you to 23 years in federal prison, 15 years for terrorism charges, 5 years for immigration fraud, 3 years for tax evasion to be served consecutively. You will also pay restitution of $340,000, and I am recommending to the Department of Homeland Security that your citizenship be revoked for fraud. You obtained it illegally. You don't deserve it. Omar broke down crying. 23 years. She'd be 65 when she got out. If she got out. If her citizenship was revoked, she'd be deported after serving her sentence. The denaturalization proceedings began immediately with the DNA evidence proving she'd married her brother to commit fraud, and her conviction for terrorism financing. It was a formality. In June 2025, a federal judge revoked her U.S. citizenship. Ilhan Omar was no longer an American citizen. She was a convicted terrorist financier serving 23 years in federal prison, facing deportation to a country that didn't want her. 6 months after her conviction, Ilhan Omar sat in her cell at FCI Coleman, a medium-security federal prison in Central Florida, far from Minneapolis, far from her former district, far from everything. She was inmate number 67854-018. That was her identity now. Not congresswoman, not activist, not refugee success story, just a number. Her first few months in prison had been brutal. Other inmates knew who she was, knew she'd been a congresswoman, knew she'd been convicted of funding terrorism. Nobody likes terrorists in prison, not even the criminals. Omar had been attacked twice in the first month, both times by inmates who'd lost family members in terrorist attacks. She'd been moved to protective custody for her own safety. Now she spent 23 hours a day in her cell, 1 hour for exercise in a small yard. no contact with other inmates, no visitors except her lawyer. Her family had abandoned her. Her husband divorced her while she was awaiting trial. Her children, ages 16, 4, and 10, had been taken by their father. He'd changed their last names, moved to another state. They didn't visit, didn't write, wanted nothing to do with their mother, the terrorist. Her siblings in America had issued public statements denouncing her. She betrayed our family. She betrayed America. She betrayed every refugee who came here honestly. Even the Somali American community in Minneapolis, the community that had elected her, wanted nothing to do with her. The Somali Community Center issued a statement. Ilhan Omar does not represent us. She has damaged our community's reputation. We condemn her actions. The political fallout was immense. Her district in Minneapolis held a special election. For the first time in 60 years, a Republican won. The Republican, a Somali American woman who ran on the slogan, "Not all Somali Americans fund terrorism," won with 57%. Nationally, Democrats ran away from Somalia issues, from refugee issues, from anything associated with Omar. The Omar effect became shorthand for how one person's corruption could poison an entire movement. Muslim candidates across the country faced hostile questions. How do we know you're not like Ilhan Omar? It was unfair. It was prejudiced. But Omar had created the association. Progressive Democrats who'd championed her were humiliated. AOC had to answer questions about why she'd supported Omar for years. Bernie Sanders faced criticism for endorsing her. The squad disbanded entirely. Meanwhile, Omar's appeals went nowhere. The evidence was too strong. The wire transfers were documented fact. The DNA test was scientific proof. The convictions stood. In December 2026, her lawyer brought news she'd been dreading. Somalia has agreed to accept you for deportation. Omar looked up from her prison jumpsuit. What? After you serve your sentence, or if you're released early for good behavior, you'll be deported to Somalia. They've confirmed they'll accept you as a citizen. But I haven't been there since I was 10 years old. I don't know anyone. You funded Al-Shabaab while you were in Congress, her lawyer said bluntly. You're lucky Somalia is accepting you at all. Most countries won't take convicted terrorists. Omar sat back in her chair, the reality sinking in. Even if she survived 23 years in federal prison, even if she got out early, she'd be deported to a country she didn't know, to a region controlled by the very terrorists she'd funded. What will I do there? She asked quietly. That's not my problem, her lawyer said. My job was to defend you at trial. I did that. You lost because the evidence was overwhelming. What happens after you're deported is up to you. Year 1 in prison, the media still covered her. Disgraced congresswoman serving 23 years for terrorism made occasional headlines when there were updates on appeals or legal proceedings. Year 2, the coverage dropped off. She was old news, other scandals, other stories. Year 3, she was forgotten. Just another federal inmate serving time. The former congresswoman, who'd been such a rising star, was now just inmate 67854 Oitit, working in the prison laundry for 12 cents an hour. In Minneapolis, her former district had moved on. The new congresswoman, Ayaan Hirsi, no relation, was popular, effective, everything Omar had pretended to be. When reporters occasionally asked about Omar, Hirsi's response was always the same. She betrayed our community. She betrayed refugees. She betrayed America. I don't speak about her. 5 years into her sentence, Omar got a letter from one of her children, the oldest, who was now 21. The letter was short. I changed my name. I go by Dad's last name now, not yours. I'm in college. I'm studying international relations. I want to actually help refugees, not betray them like you did. Don't write back. I don't want to hear from you." Omar read the letter 3 times, then put it away. She didn't cry. She'd cried herself out in the first year. Now there was just numbness. Year 7, a reporter from Vice wrote a long-form piece about her. Where is Ilhan Omar now? It described her prison routine, her isolation, her failed appeals, her impending deportation. The article included an interview conducted through her lawyer. One question stood out. "Do you regret what you did?" Her answer relayed through the lawyer. "I regret getting caught. Not regret for funding terrorism, not regret for the people killed, not regret for betraying America, just regret for getting caught." The article went viral for a day, then was forgotten. Year 10. She came up for early release consideration. Good behavior. Model prisoner. Could potentially be released after 15 years instead of 23. The parole board denied her. No remorse shown, no acceptance of responsibility. Continues to claim persecution rather than admitting guilt. Denied. Year 12. Another parole hearing, another denial. Still claims she was politically targeted. Still won't take responsibility for funding terrorists. Denied. Year 15. She was finally granted release. After 15 years in federal prison, she'd served enough time. At age 57, she walked out of FCI Coleman, a free woman for about 6 hours. ICE agents were waiting. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Because she was no longer a U.S. citizen, she was an illegal alien subject to deportation. They took her into custody, drove her to an ICE detention facility, held her for 3 days while arranging the flight to Somalia. On a Tuesday morning in June 2040, Ilhan Abdullahi Omar boarded a commercial flight from Miami to Mogadishu in handcuffs, escorted by agents who would hand her over to Somali authorities. The flight took 14 hours. She sat in the back by herself, an ICE agent on either side. The other passengers knew who she was, avoided eye contact. Nobody wanted to sit near the deported terrorist. They landed in Mogadishu in the late afternoon. Hot, dusty, nothing like the city she'd left as a child 33 years ago. Everything had changed, and she knew nobody. Somali authorities met her at the airport, not warmly, not welcoming the return of a native daughter, but taking custody of a problem the Americans were dumping on them. "You're not welcome here," one official told her bluntly, "but we have no choice but to accept you. Stay out of trouble. Don't associate with Al-Shabaab. We'll be watching." They released her at a refugee processing center, gave her $50 in local currency, told her she was on her own. Ilhan Omar, former United States Congresswoman, stood in the middle of Mogadishu with $50 and nowhere to go. No family who'd speak to her, no friends, no connections, just a middle-aged woman who'd betrayed everyone who'd ever believed in her. She tried to find work, but her name was known. "You're the one who funded Al-Shabaab from America." Employers didn't want to hire her, couldn't risk the association. She tried to connect with the Somali diaspora. They wanted nothing to do with her. "You made all of us look like terrorists." 6 months after her deportation, she was living in a one-room apartment in a slum neighborhood, surviving on odd jobs, cleaning, cooking, whatever work she could find. 1 year after deportation, a journalist from The Guardian tracked her down, wanted to do a story on Ilhan Omar, from Congress to exile. Omar agreed to the interview, desperate for any connection to her former life, any acknowledgement that she'd once mattered. The journalist asked the obvious question, "Do you regret it?" Omar had 15 years in prison to think about her answer, to develop some insight, to show growth? Her answer: I regret trusting the wrong people. I regret not being more careful. I regret letting my family down. Still no real accountability. Still no acknowledgement that she'd funded terrorism, that people had died because of money she sent, that she'd betrayed America. The article ran with the headline, Ilhan Omar, Still No Remorse. And that was the last major coverage she received. After that, nothing. Complete obscurity. In Washington, her name became a punchline, a cautionary tale. When politicians were accused of corruption, opponents would say, "Don't pull an Ilhan Omar." When refugees were discussed, someone would always bring up Omar as an example of why we needed better vetting. It was unfair to other refugees, but Omar had created that association. In Minneapolis, the Somali American community erected a memorial to the 2 American aid workers killed in the 2022 Mogadishu bombing. The bombing funded by money Ilhan Omar had sent to her brother-in-law. The memorial had 2 plaques, one honoring the aid workers, one acknowledging that members of the Somali American community condemned terrorism in all forms. Nobody mentioned Omar by name, but everyone knew. VP J.D. Vance, who'd exposed her at that committee hearing 5 years ago, was asked about her in an interview. Ilhan Omar's story should have been inspiring, he said. Refugee escapes violence, comes to America, becomes congresswoman, the American dream. But she betrayed that dream. She used her position to fund the very terrorists she claimed to have fled from. Now she's deported, living in poverty in Somalia, and nobody cares. That's not a political persecution. That's justice. In Mogadishu, Ilhan Omar turned 60 living in that one-room apartment. No family, no friends, no purpose. Just existing. Sometimes she thought about what could have been. If she'd actually been the congresswoman she'd pretended to be. If she'd actually fought for refugees instead of enriching herself and her family. If she'd been honest. But mostly she didn't think about it because thinking about what she'd lost was too painful. She was 62 when she died. Heart attack in her apartment. Nobody found her for 3 days until the neighbors complained about the smell. There was no funeral, no memorial service, no obituary in American papers. The Guardian ran 3 paragraphs. Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, former U.S. Congresswoman who was convicted of terrorism financing and deported, died in Mogadishu at age 62. Omar served in Congress from 2019 to 2025 before being expelled and convicted of sending $340,000 to al-Shabaab operatives. She served 15 years in federal prison before deportation. She is survived by 3 children who declined to comment. That was it. That was the legacy. From refugee to congresswoman to convicted terrorist to deported exile dying alone in poverty. She'd had every advantage, every opportunity, and she'd betrayed it all. Not because of Islamophobia, not because of racism, not because of political persecution, because she'd made a choice to fund terrorists, to lie about her marriage, to evade taxes, to steal campaign money, to betray America. And in the end, she paid for those choices. Not with a few years of bad press, not with losing an election, but with 15 years in prison, deportation, and dying alone in the country. She'd betrayed America to help. That wasn't persecution. That was consequence. And it was exactly what she deserved.